To repeat, all change in your life begins with a change in your self-concept. And that brings us back to what we talked about when we talked about the 3 ingredients of self-concept at the very beginning. We said that there were 3 parts: the self-ideal, the self-image, and the self-esteem, or how much you like yourself. Now, what I'd like to do now is I'd like to talk a little bit about what we call the self-ideal, because the self-ideal is the person that you would most like to be. When you start thinking about changing your personality, improving the quality of your life, your inner and your outer life, you have to start off with a target. You have to start off with something to shoot for, something to aim at. So let's talk about this. The self-ideal is a fundamental part of your personality. The self-ideal is a combination of all of the qualities, how much you like yourself, and there's a difference between your self-image and your self-ideal. The distance between these two, the way you see yourself now and the way you would ideally like to be, has a major impact on your self-esteem. People who see themselves working progressively toward becoming more and more like the people they want to be have high self-esteem. People who see themselves as having an enormous, almost unbridgeable distance between the person they see themselves as now and the person they know they should or could be usually have low self-esteem. So the starting point of change in the self-concept, to repeat, comes with defining clearly what it is you want to look like. Now, when I was about 17, 18 years old, I sat down with a notebook and I wrote out a description of the person that I wanted to be when I grew up. I wrote several pages. I described my personality and my height and my weight and how I would get along with people and so on.
Here's the big challenge of life. You can have more than you've got because you can become more than you are. That's the challenge. And of course, the other side of the coin reads, unless you change how you are, you'll always have what you got. I have found in my experience that income does not far exceed personal development. Now, sometimes income takes a lucky jump, but sure enough, unless you grow out where it is, it'll usually come back where you are. Life has strange ways. If somebody hands you $1 million, best you become a millionaire quickly, so you get to keep the money. Otherwise, sure enough, it'll disappear. Somebody once said, if you took all the money in the world, divided it up equally among everybody, it would soon all be back in the same pockets. Incredible. Success is something you attract, not something you pursue. Success is looking for a good place to stay. So instead of going after it, you work on yourself. Personal development. See, the major question to ask on the job is not what are you getting? The major question to ask on the job is, what are you becoming? The big question is not what am I getting paid here? The big question is, what am I becoming here? Because true happiness is not contained in what you get. Happiness is contained in what you become.
And many years later, 10, 15, 20 years later, after I had traveled around the world twice, after I'd been in 80 countries, after I had done a great story of a young fellow who decided he wanted to improve his life, and he was working for an insurance company. And he sat and looked around him, and he was number 28 or 29 out of 30 people in an insurance company selling insurance, and he'd been there for several years, and his career was going nowhere. And he began looking at this, and he said, now who do I admire? Who would I like to be like? Who would my ideal be? And he decided he wanted to be like the top salesman in the branch. And he started to look at the top salesmen and the top 1 or 2 salespeople in the branch, and he started to think about them and think about what they did. And he began to talk to them and get advice from them. And over the course of the next few years, by using this process, by patterning himself after the people he admired, he became more and more like them. He dressed like them, he walked like them, he talked like them, he worked the way they did, he studied the way they did, and in time, he became not only the top salesman in the branch, the top salesman in the region, the top salesman in the division, eventually the top salesman in the country, and he became a marketing vice president for one of the biggest insurance companies in the nation, simply by establishing a self-ideal. And there were 2 solid years. He read books, listened to tapes, took courses, and became an authority within the company on human relations, and then put together a course of his own and went throughout the company as the president of the company and taught this course within his company, becoming the things that he was teaching. In other words, he decided that to be very good with people was both desirable and necessary for himself, his company, and his future. And then he went about through the process of gradual defining the ideal and began working progressively toward it. In 2 years, he had rounded out his personality from being a lopsided, left-brain, linear, analytical person to being a totally rounded, fully functioning human being. One of the hallmarks of great leaders, one of the hallmarks of outstanding men and women, is that they're willing to make the efforts necessary to bring about the changes that are essential. Now, the second stage, or the second step in changing your self-concept, is to begin thinking about yourself as you would ideally be. Begin thinking about yourself as your ideal person. For instance, if you wanted to be an outstanding person in human relations, you begin thinking about yourself as you would be as a human relations specialist. But let us say you want something very simple. Most people say that their major weakness is that they are too impatient, too intolerant, they get angry too quickly, irritable, so on. Maybe what you should do is start with something very simple. Very important to start with something simple, because if you can change something simple, it proves to you that you can change something large. So you begin thinking about yourself. Let us say that you tend to be a little bit impatient or short-tempered when you're tired, or you're a little bit irritable with your children or your spouse at the end of the day. So then you begin thinking about yourself as you would be if you were a warm, patient, kind, loving, tolerant human being. Begin thinking about yourself in the situations where you normally become cross and irritable, and begin thinking about yourself as being relaxed, positive, supportive, encouraging, unruffled. Begin thinking about yourself as the ideal. Think now, who do you know who has the type of personality? Now, it can be a television personality. It can be Bill Cosby. Now, that's starting point. Because of the law of expression, whatever is impressed is expressed. If you begin thinking about yourself, you begin finding it's almost like turning the wheel of your personality. You begin to become a different person. Now, the third step is to begin to visualize. Now, what does visualize mean? Well, there are thousands of books written on visualization. One of the most powerful of all human abilities is the ability to create clear mental pictures. You see, your subconscious, which is where all of your programming takes place, is activated by mental pictures combined with emotion. So when you create clear mental pictures, when you begin to dwell on a clear mental picture of the person that you would like to be, you begin to close your eyes or think about the person that you would like to be, the subconscious cannot tell the difference between a real experience, one that is actually happening to you, and one that you vividly imagine on the screen of your mind. And this method of visualization, of creating a clear mental picture, and then remember we talked about the law of practice, which is the law of repetition. By practicing it over and over and over again. Imagine, for instance, that you wanted to become a proficient public speaker. Simple as that. And let us say this is you, and this is your eyes, and here is your conscious mind, and here is your unconscious mind. Let us say you wanted to become a proficient public speaker. Well, if you went out and you gave a whole series of talks, and you got positive response, and people applauded and told you that it was a good talk, and you did this over and over again, no matter how terrified you are of public speaking right now, if you did it often enough, gradually you would store up enough memories to the point where you would feel no uneasiness at all about speaking publicly. Now, the reason I mention speaking publicly is that something like 54% of the American public would rather die than give a talk in public. They put the fear of public speaking ahead of the fear of death. It's one of the greatest of all fears in our society. However, no child is born as afraid of public speaking. No child comes into the world with a fear of speaking in front of audiences. As a matter of fact, every one of us gave our first public talk stark naked, upside down, in front of a room full of strangers, if you remember that, and it's been downhill for most of us ever since.